Yo, yo, yo. Make a stick. Another day, another dollar. Chunking on Anki. Got one flashcard, y'all. What are the 8 sections of chapter 3 makes up your practice? Myth and mass practice, which we read yesterday. Spaced practice, which we read yesterday. Interleaved practice, varied practice. Don't know. Something about improving complex mastery for medical students. These principles are broadly applicable. And to the takeaway in this one, I think, is developing discrimination skills. Boom, got them all. Nice. Monkey's done. What did we read about yesterday? Well, we read about the intro. We actually read quite a lot yesterday. We read the introduction to chapter 3, which was about the beanbag study, in which I think 8-year-olds were split into 2 groups. One group practiced throwing beanbags into buckets 3 feet away. Others practiced throwing beanbags into buckets that were 2 feet away and 4 feet away. After 12 weeks of them practicing, they were basically tested on throwing beanbags into 3 feet buckets. Who performed the best? Well, it wasn't actually the group that had practiced 3 foot buckets the whole time. It was the group that had never practiced 3 foot buckets, but instead had practiced 2 and 4 foot buckets. So very, very interesting there. That's about not spaced. It's about varied practiced. Varied and interleaved, a little bit practiced, but yeah. All right. Spaced practice. No, the myth of mass practice was the first section we read. Basically that, like, mass practice is everywhere. What is mass practice? Well, it's basically like the single-minded focus on one thing until, like, you get it right, or, you don't get it right, but you just spend a significant amount of time until you basically give up or get it right in that time period, or you spend the amount of time you were planning to devote. Single-minded focus on one skill, one thing. Now, mass practice leads to quick learning, but it also leads to quick forgetting. So rapid improvement, rapid forgetting. That's the downfall. And over the long term, if we define learning as like being able to remember stuff, retain stuff, and then be able to pull it out when you need it and use it, mass practice is not good for that, because it doesn't lead to flexible knowledge, and that knowledge is often forgotten very quickly after practicing it. Even though we know that spaced practice, interleaved practice, varied practice is more effective for long-term learning and retention, even when we know this and we see the studies, it still feels like mass practice is more productive, and that interleaved, varied, and spaced practice is less productive. And one reason we think mass practice, we believe in it so much, is because you can literally see the progress happening in real time. It's like the proof. We're seeing the proof. We don't see the forgetting. And when we do interleave, space, and varied practice, it feels like we're not learning very quickly. It feels like we're maybe not learning at all, but counterintuitively, this is when we're learning potentially the most. And then finally, we read the section about spaced repetitions, spaced practice, and basically that spaced practice is more effective than mass practice for learning. It leads to more effort. It leads to reconsolidation. Well, why? And I guess the question is, why is mass practice more or less effective than spaced repetition, spaced practice? Spaced practice, well, because 3 reasons at least that I got from this section. Consolidation, so the actual like encoding and the formation of these neural structures that are mentally representing something, these take hours to days to fully develop. It's like lifting a weight. It could take up to 72 hours for your muscle to get all the growth from it. So lifting, if it takes 72 hours to fully develop from your last workout, you probably shouldn't work out until like at least 72 hours afterward. That changes with how active you often you lift and etc. But so consolidation takes a lot more time. So mass practice is building on short-term memory, not long-term memory. I think that might have been number 2, and number 3 would be the effort required, the cognitive effort required to recall and retrieve when spaced out due to some forgetting that's happened in between the practice sessions actually leads to re-triggering reconsolidation, so more growth of those neural structures. And in that spaced practice section, they talked about the study of medical students in which one group was taught 4 lessons on microsurgery in one day and tested a month later, and the other group was tested or learned 1 lesson one day, waited a week, second lesson a week of waiting, third. So they did like 4 lessons as well, but spaced in between. Each one was spaced out by a week. This was all spaced within a single day. What were the results? Well, after a month of each, like they had a test after their last lesson a month later, and the group that learned it all in one day performed worse in every category that they measured, and 16% of them actually caused irreversible damage, whereas nobody caused irreversible damage in the space group, and they outperformed on average everyone in the other group in every category. All right, let's make sure we got everything. Yep. Cool. Yep. Cool. Yep. Cool. Well, there we go. All caught up. Now it's time to start reading the section on interleaved practice. So I'm going to read this, and then I'll be back in a second to recall. So talk to you in a second. All right, guys, I just read that whole section on interleaved practice, and there's a lot in there. So first of all, what is interleaved practice? Interleaved practice is mixing up your practice between 2 or more different subjects or skills. Meaning if I'm trying to learn how to play a piece on guitar, I will play that piece, but I'll also practice another piece or 2 other pieces, and then I'll switch between. I'll play one, and then I'll switch the other, and then I'll switch the other. That's mixing it up. That's interleaving. Or if I'm trying to learn math problems, like maybe I'll do one addition problem, and then I'll do one subtraction problem, and then one multiplication problem, rather than just doing all the addition until I get it right and I know how to do it, and then switching to subtraction. Now I know how to do this, and then I go to multiplication. Rather than doing that, you go, all right, let's try an addition. All right, let's try subtraction. All right, let's say multiplication. All right, let's switch it up again. And you keep mixing them all up. Now this feels way slower. It feels way less productive than mass practice, so it's very rarely used because you cannot see the long-term benefits really as obviously as you can see the short-term benefits of mass practice, of learning really quickly. But there was a study that was used to illustrate this effect in Make It Stick, and that was this study in which some high school or college students are taught how to find the volumes of obscure geometric shapes, like wedges and half cones and stuff, like weird stuff that you wouldn't learn otherwise. And so one group, so there was 4 problems, right, for each of the 4. There's 4 obscure objects, and there's 4 problems for each. One group did all 4 of one, and then they went to the next 4 for the next, and then they did all 4 of the third, and then they did all 4 of the fourth. So that's like masked, not interleaved. The other group did one problem of one, and then one problem the next, and one problem the next, and one problem the next, and then they switched them up. And each one they did one, and then they'd go to a new one, then they go to a new one, go to the new one, switch. And after these 16 problems, originally, the group that masked them got an 89% overall on all of them. They averaged 89% correct. Pretty good. In comparison to the group that interleaved their practice, only got a 60% worse, right? But then they waited a week and they retested them. What were the results? Well, the group that mass practiced got a 20%. So they went from 89 to 20%. What about the interleaved practice group? The interleaved practice group went from a 60 to a 63. They improved over a week, whereas the group that masked got worse by 4.5, almost, over 4 times worse, whereas the group that interleaved improved. Not only did they maintain, they improved. So that's a 215% increase in abilities or improvement over a week for interleaving than mass practice. So pretty good stuff there. It's just one study. We can see a lot more. I'd like to see a lot more studies and data on this kind of stuff, but yeah, I think that was basically it. I forgot to write what is this section about. All right, so cool. Feel slower and less productive, right? Yeah. I'll say the main point is interleaved. There's no room right here. Let's front arrow right here. All right. Interleaved practice leads to long-term growth and benefits and learning that's durable. Spaced practice, no, mass practice, I mean. Mass practice on the other hand leads to short-term gains that don't last. Cool. There you have it. I've currently got 3 more minutes, so let's go ahead and read the first. Okay, this actually is really long. No, it's not. Let's go ahead and read like the first 2 paragraphs here, and I'll be back in a second. All right, I just read the first paragraph and a half of varied practice section because the second paragraph is extremely dense, so I only got about through half of it. But varied practice, they bring back the beanbag study in which they're throwing. One group throws from 3 feet only, and the other group throws from 2 feet and 4 feet, and they outperform the 3 feet only in a 3-foot test. That's kind of an example of varied practice. Varied practice, though this was a motor skill test, the studies show that it's likely effective for all forms of learning, cognitive learning and motor skill learning, and yeah, both, not just motor skill learning. And the theory behind it, or the idea, is that varied practice leads to an increased ability to transfer knowledge and use it in more unique and novel situations. Okay. That's it for today. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. See ya.